Hey, listen up, everybody. Our pilot has a few words to say. Make sure you're paying attention as we take this detour on the Lou Reed bandwagon. After all the hassle and heartache of 1977, Lou Reed finally did manage to get his binaural live album made in 1978. As you recall, Lou's second album for Arista Records began life as a live album. But many personal and professional battles and technical difficulties and bottles of scotch later, Street Hassle hit the streets in February 1978 as a twisted mashup of studio and live recordings. It turned out great, attracted a lot of accolades for Lou, and actually did reasonably well in the marketplace. But Street Hassle was not what Lou set out to do. He got his heart set on a live album with the band of jazz-oriented musicians he had been working with for a while. So now that Street Hassle had his trajectory back on an upswing, now would be as good a time as any to get it done. First, he had some culpas to mea with some of his bandmates. He got most of them back with promises to do better by them this time. Saxophonist Marty Fogel and the two Michaels, keyboardist Fonfara and drummer Sikorsky, re-enlisted. Lou found a suitable bass player in Ellard Moose Bowles to replace Bruce Yaw. And he brought along a guitar player named Stuart Heinrich, who had helped Lou a lot during the Street Hassle studio sessions. He also hired a couple of backup singers, Angela Howell and Chrissy Faith. Reed got this entourage booked for several nights in May 1978 at the Bottom Line in Greenwich Village to cap off a 3-month cross-continent tour. The band formed into a pretty tight, cohesive unit during that trip. And when they got back to New York, the normally reticent Lou had a lot to say to the home crowd. Live, Take No Prisoners was released in November 1978, about 6 months after those shows were recorded at the Bottom Line, and a little more than a year after Lou wrapped up Street Hassle. Fans and writers tend to intertwine those two albums, to think of them as two heads of one monster. That's fair. Both of them ooze with Lou's explosive anger and intimidating punk attitude, and came along at a time when those traits were all the rage in rock music. Both albums sound and feel and smell exactly like what you can imagine the dank, dingy New York underground might have sounded and felt and smelled like. If you can't imagine that, have a look at that drawing on the cover of Take No Prisoners. That'll give you a pretty good idea. All everyone wrote and talked about when this album came out, and what Take No Prisoners is remembered for 45 years later, were Lou's numerous biting, malicious monologues. Lou spends long stretches between and during songs trading insults with the audience, ragging on his stage crew, spitting out mostly unfunny and sometimes offensive jokes, giving shout-outs to celebrities in the audience, complaining about critics, and telling stories behind his songs. Honestly, I don't think Lou is angry so much as he's trying too hard to be funny and just comes off as a sardonic jerk, at least to my 2023 ears. Supposedly, Lou took this approach for this record to fight off criticism that he rarely engaged with his audience. You know how people say you should not use sarcasm on the internet, that it doesn't translate well? That's exactly what's going on with Lou on Take No Prisoners. There is more to this album than Lou's Lenny Bruce impressions. The band is solid and well rehearsed, and we get some interesting jazz and funk flavored takes on a few of Lou's classics, as well as a handful of newer songs. The band holds it together pretty well when Reed goes off on his tangents during a couple of the standards, Sweet Jane and Walk on the Wild Side. We do get a couple of stretches of straightforward performance to mixed results. Satellite of Love, Berlin, and Leave Me Alone are musical highlights. I love the version here of I Wanna Be Black, though you might want to be gone by the time Reed starts vamping near the end with some pretty disgusting language. We do get a couple of cringeworthy, painful tracks, mostly due to terrible vocal performances by Lou. Pale Blue Eyes is horrendous. The band is fine, but Reed's singing is awful. Street Hassle isn't very good here. Just skip that track and go listen to the amazing studio version of that song. There's nothing about live Take No Prisoners that I would call definitive or essential. It's no rock and roll animal, to be sure. Take No Prisoners is a decent live album. It's an interesting curiosity, mostly for the peek it provides into Lou's defensive and guarded personality. It's also worth a few listens for the radically peculiar, layered arrangements of some of Lou's best-known songs. In the end, it is not an album that will find its way off the shelf often after your first couple of listens. Lou would release a couple of live albums later in his career that are better than this one, even if none of them are quite so unique as Take No Prisoners. Live, Take No Prisoners did mark the end of an era for Reed. This really was the last we heard from rock and roll animal Lou, as I refer to the dark, cartoonish character he wrapped around himself for the first 6 years of his solo career. Lou had a much harsher term for this phase. He uses it near the end of the Sweet Jane parody that kicks off the Street Hassle LP. A couple of seismic events happened in Lou's life around this time that spun his head around and ultimately set him on a straighter path. Lou met a woman named Sylvia Morales at CBGB one night in 1976, not long after his relationship with Rachel Humphreys disintegrated. And shortly after Take No Prisoners was recorded, Lou had a conversation with a doctor who told him he needed to lose some bad habits if he wanted vital organs not to explode inside him. Join me next time on Bandwagons when we take a look at The Bells, the album that marked Reed's first tentative steps into responsible adulthood. Please hit all the buttons that excite the algorithms. We'll talk to you soon.